Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Jorge. Welcome once again to another fine episode of the Ferris Wheel. I'm one of your co-hosts, co-creators, and co-conspirators, Ferris Kennedy. And a booth to the left of me, a man who has spent many countless nights in the Playboy Mansion and developed a great friendship with Hugh Hefner during his time,
Dr. Ian Clark.
And the booth, and a booth across from me with our producer Armando, a man who was supposed to play Wilson in the Tom Hanks movie Castaway and lost to a volleyball,
Stephen Wheeler.
And today, ladies and gentlemen, we actually have a special guest.
Who's that?
We have a fan. When we had the contest on the Facebook page, we had said, please list us one of your favorite bands, and if you are selected, you could join us on the Ferris Wheel show. Mm-hmm. And we have Carlo Capelli, who actually won the contest and is here with us today. We are in Cleveland, Ohio, because we figured why not do it at the birthright of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Oh yeah, and this morning actually we visited the museum, I'll call it, and we loved it, in particular the Jimi Hendrix exhibits. He wore gorgeous clothes, eh?
This is fantastic. As you know, we are on our magical mystery tour, the North American version, and eventually towards this season, we will make some stops in England. So we want to welcome our guest, Carlo Capelli. Welcome,
Thank you,
Carlo.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
Carlo is a huge Pink Floyd fan, so we figured why not do a show on Floyd.
Sure.
So now that you heard my voice, I brought three other friends along, and go ahead, Wheeler, and take it away.
So the history of Pink Floyd is actually truly fascinating when you think about it. How did this group form in '65 in Cambridge, England, to play basically really alternative music, became the biggest British progressive rock band of all time? I mean, these guys had the most successful acts. They sold 73.5 million albums in the US alone. I mean, it's just insane. And if you actually put into worldwide markets, they've sold anywhere in between 175 and 200 million albums worldwide. This is just a really interesting thing, because these guys were actually, when they started, they were the true product of their era, which was basically they were talented teenagers in the 60s in Great Britain, and they were all from academic backgrounds, most of them from Cambridge.
Cambridge.
So there, Syd Barrett was there, Roger Waters was there, and David Gilmour all came from this very, I mean, it's a really academic background, and the thing that linked them together was basically they love to play the guitar, and all of them said, well, everything's good, but let's go to London and just further our education, not just like in the school way, but in the arts, architecture, music,
drugs.
And drugs.
Yes, lots of it.
And basically, they went from something that could have gone one album, because it was so weird and very much of its time and place, but they were able to take that and just explode and be one of the greatest bands of all time. And so I've broken it into different periods, so that'll be easier for us to really appreciate the extent of the history of Floyd. And it starts with Roger Syd Barrett, which really, when you look at his early bio, you don't think rock god, because he was the son of a university don, and couldn't be more from a conservative family. He just like went through this period in the 60s where he decided that music was boring and he had to do something about it. Ironically, though, Syd Barrett is only about 3 years in the history of Floyd, and not necessarily the albums that everybody knows. But to this day, Syd Barrett, when you hear that name, you hear Pink Floyd and you hear musical genius.
So he was kind of I always think of him along the lines of the Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones. Basically, he founded the band. He set the tone of the band, and then poof, he was gone.
It's usually like that. Even Guns N' Roses with Steve Adler, he was one of the founding members,
Yeah.
and because he had a drinking issue,
Good point.
gone.
gone. But he set the tone.
It's it.
Yeah, it's really weird, eh?
Mm.
So ironically, Pink Floyd is actually the result of implosions of other bands. So it's they're kind of like a nuclear mutant kind of situation. So there were a bunch of bands in '64 that started breaking up. They were called Sigma 6, the Megadeths, plural, the Screaming Abdads, and eventually they became the Abdads. And basically what happened was bits and pieces of those bands got together. So Bob Close, the guitarist, the bass player Roger Waters, the drummer Nick Mason, and the keyboardist Rick Wright basically all fused together. And actually Rick Wright at that point in time was only playing wind instruments. So it's, and no, not the skin flute. But they decided to join together, and they formed a new band called the T-Set, which couldn't be more of a British name for a band if they tried. And they were later joined by guitarist Syd Barrett. And at that point, he took over the band and decided, oh, by the way, I'm the primary vocalist. And the name was dropped when they found out that they were on a bill with a band that had the exact same name. So legend has it that Barrett came up with the alternative name on the spur of the moment, and he chose the name the Pink Floyd Sound after two blues musicians, Pink Anderson and Floyd Council. So for a time after that, they oscillated between T-Set, the Pink Floyd Sound, and frankly, eventually they just stuck with the Pink Floyd Sound, mostly because nobody else used that name. And eventually, of course, the word sound dropped off. So it's like Hollywood land became Hollywood kind of situation.
Similar to the way Syd Barrett dropped off. Oh, shoot, too soon? I'm sorry. Did I say that too soon? Oh.
But I think like with Pink Floyd, especially at the time when they were coming up, they were very different compared to a lot of the bands of that time from 65 to 69, like the Rolling Stones and the Beatles, and even Led Zeppelin later on, where Pink Floyd was very somewhat psychedelic.
Yeah.
Compared to the other bands, were very blues driven. They were very influenced by blues artists like Muddy Waters and of those artists at the time. So I think in a way they kind of were able to separate themselves from all those other bands that were coming up through the 60s.
Well, yeah, like you mentioned, but they started actually covering, a little like the Rolling Stones, they actually started covering rhythm and blues. One of their big hits, if we could call a hit, was Louie Louie. But they really quickly went into psychedelic interpretations. Mm-hmm. And they just went into like these extended improvised section and psychedelic solos, and people looked at them and they're like, "What in the world are these guys on?"
LSD.
Well,
exactly.
They're on a lot of stuff.
Yes.
But yeah, that's.
Luckily enough for the history of music, they quickly lost that heavily jazz-oriented sound. They actually lost a few players along the way, thanks to that. But they started writing their own piece. Barrett, of course, was the main force behind that, and like a lot of other bands at the time, he was heavily influenced by American surf music. Of all, like, you don't really think surf when you hear Pink Floyd, but Dr. Clark will tell you the Beach Boys had a really huge impact in England in the mid-'60s.
No Beach Boys, no Sgt. Pepper.
Exactly, and then no Pink Floyd.
Good linkage. Yeah.
And no Pink Floyd, no Rush?
Wow.
Well, some people will hate Floyd for that one.
Well, just throwing it out there, that's all.
So at that point, they really start having this success, but it's an underground success. So they become really the favorites of what was called the underground movement. And they played in the biggest clubs in London for that genre of music, which was the UFO Club, the Marquee Club, and the Roundhouse.
Especially the UFO Club. They were pretty well the de facto kind of house band. Like, how bizarre is that? I mean, you can't. You have these guys in a dance hall, but that's back in the '60s, right? It wasn't necessarily heavy four beats to the bar dance music. People, just, as they say, grooved around to this kind of druggy stuff. Pink Floyd, in so many ways, was of its time, and how they escaped their time is one of those bizarre miracles, because so many bands went down in flames, right, from the psychedelic, and a few, maybe like the Moody Blues or something, it escaped it, but most of these guys went down in flames, and no one has ever heard of them since.
I like to compare Pink Floyd to say that they were ahead of their time for the era that they came in. Good comparison would be similar to what Queen did in the 70s. Stuff should have been produced in the 80s, and the stuff they did in the 80s should have been in the 90s. With Floyd, what they did in the late 60s, early 70s, that's stuff that you should actually had in the 80s. And then the stuff in the late 70s should have went, so on and so forth. So this is what I like about bands like Pink Floyd in particular, that you could respect the creativity. Now, I just want to ask our super fan here, Carlo, what does Pink Floyd mean to you as a fan and a young adolescent growing up in your part of the city or your high school era, listening and getting into Floyd? What did it mean to you, just in a small little brief?
For me, it was this their musical talent in the sense that how they were able to extend a lot of their songs through. Not innovation, but just on the whim of things, we're able to extend their musical talents in this one song. Like "Shine On Your Crazy Diamonds." Like, it's a 26-minute long song where you had Nick Mason and a lot of and David Gilmour just extending their talents as a percussionist and as a guitar player, and it's really like Dr. Clark says, very, very bizarre how they were just able to put their musical talents on their LPs or on their vinyl records at the time, and you can see how some bands kind of try to take their concept into their own music, like say with the Beatles with the White Album, or like say Lucy in the Sky of Diamonds and what have you, there, where you can try to see that they were trying to put some of their psychedelic experiences into their music as well. Like, so they really, really did break a great deal of barriers, and they did really stretch the lines of innovation in terms of their music. But they also, what they've done very, very well was that they also were able to put their music on stage, because they're one of the first bands that were able to put their light shows and their stage performances with their music as well, which was very, very, I mean, unfortunately I never had the opportunity to see them live because I'm not of that age era. But from what I've heard through talking to other people who have attended their concerts, was quite. It was an experience in itself.
Well, you're lucky those people remember those concerts.
Yes,
Half the people I spoke to don't remember what they had for breakfast yesterday that went to those concerts. Go ahead, Wheels.
So we get to the point now where they released their debut album, which was The Piper at the Gates of Dawn, and that came out in August of 1967, which as a Canuck is a really important year for us. But in England, it also became a good year for music. Ironically enough, that's not the original title of the project. It was called Projection, but it was judged a little too psychedelic title. Although I don't see how the Piper at the Gates of Dawn was any less psychedelic.
Yeah, that's from a novel. I forget, or is it a poem? I wish it would come.
I think it's a poem.
No, it is. It's a poem.
Is it a poem?
Yeah, Piper at the Gates of Dawn.
But it's considered still to this day to be the prime example of English psychedelic music. So first album, and you become kind of not necessarily a legend at that point, but a reference point. which is really interesting when you think about it. The album tracks are predominantly written by Barrett. They showcase poetic lyrics. It's a very eclectic mix of music. He goes from the avant-garde freeform. If you want an example, that's Interstellar Overdrive. Then he goes into really whimsical songs like The Scarecrow, which was inspired by the Fenlands, which is a little region of the rural north where Barrett, Gilmour, and Waters are from. And during this period, the band toured with Jimi Hendrix, which made them go from relatively obscure underground to much more popular band. And as the band grew more popular, unfortunately, the stress of life on the road mixed with some significant intake of psychedelic drugs started taking a toll on Barrett. In January 1968, guitarist David Gilmour joined the band to carry out the playing and singing duties of Sid, whose mental health had been deteriorating for several months. It's apparently, the legend has it that he would go on stage and basically not play for an hour and a half. And some shows, others that he would just play but completely in the wrong key. So Gilmour actually had to walk in because it just became unsustainable at that point.
Basically, he mailed it in. That was it.
Well, he mailed it in from another galaxy situation.
Yeah, he might have been bipolar. I'm not sure. It wasn't just drugs, but they sure didn't help.
Yeah, I think he became bipolar because of the drugs. Like he had like the potential for it, and
exacerbated the.
Acted as definitely as an accelerant to whatever issues that he was having at the time.
Nevertheless, though, it was intended that Barrett would remain as the band figurehead and main songwriter. With Barrett's behavior, though, it became less and less predictable. And unfortunately, his use of LSD was constant. You could rely on him for one thing, and that was LSD taking. And he became completely unstable at one point on stage. So it was actually a point. There's apparently the legend has it that he played "Scream, Die Lady Scream, Old Women with a Basket." He basically screamed it at the audience for about 10 minutes. And the band just said, like, okay, that's it. We really can't take it anymore. Thus, in April 1968, Barrett was shown the door. It was formalized because this being a British band, everything was signed in contracts and the lawyers were there. And basically the band adopted a new manager to finish their second album, which was A Saucerful of Secrets. And they had begun it the previous year, but because of Barrett's behavior, it just took a very long time to complete. The album contains a lot of the arbingers of what was to come, including a centerpiece that was a 12-minute title track, which in 1968, Dr. Clark will probably be able to tell us. I don't think anybody else did a 12-minute.
No. What you had happen in 68 was the emergence of FM radio. FM radio was the first medium to actually play 12-minute songs. Before that, most pop songs were about 2, maybe 3 minutes at the max. And suddenly FM, especially out of the Northeast, New York City, these guys would play album sides. Yeah, that's a really important point, that FM radio also made Pink Floyd mega gods. Without the introduction of the long play stuff going on in the late 60s in FM, there's no way Floyd would have made it. Their songs were not pop songs. Even See Emily Play, I wouldn't even call it a pop song, although it was on AM charts. That, there was this bizarre confluence of forces that made Pink Floyd megastars. You cannot write this stuff up and put it on paper. I still to this day don't know how they did it, because most of their songs are very slow moving, right? Kind of dirge-like songs, a lot of organ, the point was made earlier on by our special guest Carlo that they're a great live band. Yeah, that's because this lasers and the smoke bomb, whatever they got, matches the song so well. There's really a coordination. A lot of bands don't. They'll set off pyrotechnics, and you're going, "Why are you doing what?" With Pink Floyd, it just fits. I saw them live, and it was just perfect. It was seamless. So that has a lot to do with. But you can't write this stuff up. No manager can plan this. They're one of those bizarre, great fluke bands. They didn't write hits in the way the Beatles did or the Rolling Stones. Pink Floyd turned into the biggest bands of all time for unpredictable, strange reasons.
But if I'm not mistaken, they went through great expense too to create a good live show as well, with the like you said, with the lights and the lasers and the smokes, because at the time they were really like the innovators. They're the one who started the laser shows and the light shows, so there was really no technology at the time to create this stuff. So
it's true, and they would float their pig around, the inflatable pig, and you just didn't see this stuff at rock concerts. Most of the time they came out with the obligatory strobe and some dry ice and some guy jumping around in silver pants.
The disco ball as well, rotating.
Yeah,
in
and
the
Pink
stage.
Floyd were these slow kind of, I don't know what they were, almost like a funeral march songs, right? Nothing, it's not, I'm not even sure if it's rock and roll. I'm not sure what it is. It sure isn't Louie Louie, And they were using sound effects like in Money. It was,
They had a cash register in the background.
Ding, 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 like
Time as well, like the song Time would be as well, like with all the clocks going off and different clocks going off at the same time.
Yeah, it's just very well produced music. And anyway, the history of Pink Floyd is very strange to follow. You cannot map it out.
Yes. Searching for sound, Wheeler?
Yeah, well, exactly. Speaking of mapping things out, the next few albums of Floyd are basically an experimentation in trying to find their sound and their concept. It started with Barbet Schroeder actually coming to them and asking them to produce a soundtrack for a film that was called... I lost the title. Oh, crap. But anyways, so you'll, I think, Carlo, you might know, it's the album with a windmill on it.
Who came to them? Who was the guys?
Barbet Schroeder. So anyways, basically what they gave him was less of a soundtrack than an accompanying music for the film, which is basically about a group of hippies on the drug trail in Ibiza. So,
perfect.
Yeah, exactly. And during the same month, just for like a really bizarre historical fluke, they played live at a show called Atmospherics, which was actually the BBC's live coverage of the first moon landing. So they created the soundtrack for the moon landing for British listeners.
This is what I mean. Like, these guys were like Destiny's Child, so to speak. Lady Luck shone on them. Like, can you imagine more perfect music for a moon landing than Floyd?
Well, that while smoking a joint kind of situation.
Yeah, really. While it's buzzing out. It's just one small step for a man. It's just so perfect.
And then came their first double album, which Carlo loves. Can you name the title?
Well, the only double album that I know of is The Wall, but that's much later on in 78 or 79, but it's...
Okay, so it's the ignored double album of the... that starts with U.
Oh, Ummagumma.
There we go.
Ummagumma?
Ummagumma.
Which is actually a very weird album. It's a mix of live recordings and unchecked studio experimentations by the band members. And so basically... each recording is one band member having half a side of a vinyl as a solo project. Actually, one of the sides has Mason's wife as a flautist, but she's not actually on the sleeve. She's not mentioned, but she was just brought in because he wanted some flute on his...
darling.
So the Beatles did one song each, and Floyd did one side of a record each.
I remember at the time, well, not the time exactly, but it was kind of nailed as more of a self-indulgent project.
Well, I think it's still considered a self-indulgent
Yeah,
project.
I mean, it was good. Someone needs to give him a bit of a slap and say, you're gonna have to get your marching in line because it didn't go anywhere. That said, a lot of people bought Ummagumma. I mean, I remember in a lot of houses it was kind of a drug album.
Exactly,
Sorry,
yeah.
but it was.
But interestingly enough, though, it kickstarted their reputation in Europe, where weird was good, and it was also starting to bubble up in the States, and their reputation got them to play in some of the key festivals at the time. So some of those festivals being Bath, Antibes, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it that right, Rotterdam, and the Montreux Jazz Festival, of all places. And these festivals led them to create Atom Heart Mutter, which was actually a collaboration of the band with an avant-garde composer whose name was Ron Geeson. And it's at this point where they become really like insanely big on title pieces that are incredibly long. This is the album where one side of the album is basically the title piece, and it's a 23-minute long rock orchestral suite. The second side features one song from each of the band's then current vocalists, which means Roger Waters, who did If, David Gilmour, that did Fat Old Son, and Rick Wright, who did Summer 68.
By the way, Wheels, I believe it was La Vallée, the movie that you were thinking of.
Is that the prelude of Summer 69?
The Vallée, La Vallée was the Barbette Schroeder.
Yes, okay.
That's the one. La Vallée is that one that Pink Floyd did the music, and that one was in 1972, I believe.
Oh, actually, no, that's the second. They did two soundtracks with...
Then
which Schroeder?
Obscured by Clouds?
Yes, I think.
There you go.
So... from Atom Art Mutter on.
That's the one with the pig, eh?
No, that's the one with the cow showing
the
you.
cow. A moo cow.
Oh, our super fan actually found a title. It's more.
Oh, it's more.
More cowbell.
Did they even have a title like Super Hot Chick in Tight Pants? Like, was anything like that? Instead of these...
They're British.
Esoteric titles like...
Adam Had a Heart?
Yeah. Like
or Animals?
Animals. Yeah, they had animals. But you know what I mean? Floyd was incredible.
Piper at the Gates of Dawn. Like,
what a great title. Like, it's going to be a Stone album.
What's it called?
Ummagumma.
The Dark Side of the Mood.
Yeah. Dark Side of it's going to...
And Atom Art Mutter is also the first one where you hear some montage. You have a song on there called Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast. And it's a sound collage of a man cooking and eating breakfast. And his thoughts on the matter.
Yeah, I'll buy that.
Well, get me my CD copy for that one.
And ironically, though, this is the album where they got an offer for their first U.S. tour. And they actually also started at this point, as Carlo mentioned, like this vision that they had of incredible shows. So it was on this tour that they invented something called the Azimuth Coordinator, which is basically a joystick that they use to pan the sound around their quadraphonic PA system.
Wow, man.
Which you have to remember, like, quadraphonic sound was in its infancy at that point. Like, there's no such thing as surround sound at this point.
Quadraphonic sound had a very short shelf life, believe me. I bought one of them. No one had quadraphonic players. It lived for about 45 seconds. But Floyd was really into this stuff, though, and a lot of those bands were the art bands then. No one were going to go out and buy 4 speakers.
No, exactly. And this was also followed by the considerably more focused music of Meddle. This is in 1971. Again, though, we get one of these amazing tracks, the 23-minute long epic Echoes, which is on the B side of the LP.
And how prolific was this band? Look what they put out from about 68 to 72. Their kind of, halcyon days are just amazing. 73.
Exactly. And although this is considered to be the first real Pink Floyd album where their sound is really their own, and they've gotten rid of the orchestra that was more prominent on Atom Art Mutter, and it was followed then by the release of Obscured by Clouds that you mentioned in 1972, which is also another soundtrack.
Well, I was going to say, at that point now they're really starting to clean up a bit of their music, started basically getting their chops and really collectively starting to write some really good music, really good songs, and the sound started being a little bit more clear and very. There was a nice flow to their albums, whereas like with Ummagumma and other albums, it was kind of like all over the place. There wasn't no real flow to it. Like with Ummagumma, it was basically a soul album of individual band members. Whereas as they're transcending more closer to 1970, 71, 72, they're really starting to clean up their act a bit, and in terms of their writing, but also in terms of their cue-ins, in terms of with their instruments, making sure that everybody was just all in this really getting their stuff together.
And ironically, this is an amazing analysis, actually, and it resumes it really well. And it's Obscured by Clouds. That is their first U.S. top 50 album. And when you think about it, it's a rock band whose first top 50 is a soundtrack. It just goes to show.
I mean, what's also amazing is that any record company would give a band, I'm going to say 5 albums here, for whatever, that much time to develop. Can you imagine that today? Yeah, we'll give you 5 albums to develop your sound. So here's $4 or $5 million plus 15 in promo tours. And back in the 60s, people, the EMI, Capitol, whoever was going to do it, Polydor, would often invest like that in these bands to come along. This is why Floyd is lady luck all over. They went from doing, See Emily Play to something like Obscured by Cloud. Wow. Someone gave them the money and funded them,
but also gave them the time and the patience to develop properly. Whereas now it's almost like here today, gone tomorrow. Almost like you're the flavor of the week instead of the flavor of the year. I find now that like Dr. Clark says, that they're not really giving, the record companies are not really giving the time to the artist to properly develop. Almost like an analogy in sports, like in hockey, where they're giving the players, sending them down to the minors, giving them the time to develop properly so they can get the skills that they need to really produce, which is the same thing in the music industry. Back in the day, like the Beatles and like the Stones and Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin, all those bands were given the time and the opportunity to properly develop, to properly clean up their writing abilities and musically as well with their instruments.
Yeah, I think I agree with that's just now with all this American Idol junk, everybody, you have to come into the world, walking and talking. Everyone's fully born. Yeah, well, you need the old, what's they say, 10,000 hours, the old cliche now, it's become a cliche, 10,000 hours of practice to even go ready for prime time.
That's it. I don't understand how these shows could think they could produce a star within,
now and then you have season with like an Adam Lambert type guy, but most of them you just sitting there.
Don't get me going on Adam Lambert.
Yeah, but you know what I mean.
Adam Lambert though is talented. That's the thing. He's gifted, man. He's got the voice. He could do it.
My point being though, for every Lambert, for God's sakes, you got to suffer through. It's okay to play in clubs like I don't know, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Pink Floyd, and kind of hack it out every night and get better and better and better. So by the time you break, you're writing songs, that are just amazing. But Floyd, again, had so many chances, and people kept believing in them, and they just kept going. The Beatles and Stones didn't have that.
They had to just cut it right away.
They had, I think the first Beatle album was cut in 10 hours, I think.
Because they even said George Martin thought that the Beatles were rough. They needed they were awful. Literally, their sound was not the greatest.
He thought their humor was funny, but as a band, what else you got?
Exactly. So during the tour that they did for Obscured by Clouds, they started a little side project called Eclipse, which basically they worked on during the tour. So they would add these songs during the sets, and this became the legendary album, The Dark Side of the Moon, which was released in March of 1973. And basically, Dark Side of the Moon is the demonstration of Waters' talent as both a lyricist and a conceptualist. It's the first Pink Floyd LP to feature lyrics exclusively written by Roger Waters, and it is considered also a musical tour de force by Gilmour. It's also considered the first of 5 concept album. It's basically described as the different pressures applying to everyday life. The concept, conceived in Nick Mason's kitchen, of all places, was basically a series of themes like On the Run was dedicated to travel, Time is depicted as the encroachment of old age, The Great Gig in the Sky, which was actually originally named as Mortality Sequence and Religious Theme during the development, dealt with death. Money, of course, is a satire where they talk about corruption of the influence of money that often comes with fame and power. You have Us and Them, which talks about violence, and the futility of war, which is a term a theme that comes back a lot in Waters' stuff, and Brain Damage, which talks of insanity and neuroses, and it's also neurosis.
Which I think is a song basically about Syd Barrett and what he was going through at the time. Brain Damage, like a lot of their songs from Dark Side of the Moon and prior to that, they really started writing and are playing musically about Syd Barrett and his
mental
breakdown and the problems that he was having in terms of fighting with that. But also Dark Side of the Moon, if I'm not mistaken, is when really the conflict between David Gilmour and Roger Waters was starting to develop, because David Gilmour was starting to feel, if I'm not mistaken, that he was not being allowed to express his abilities in terms of writing, as well as his music abilities as well, and playing his instrument. So I think from the Dark Side of the Moon, ironically, they're starting to really get their success, but it's also when the band progressively starting to fall apart at the same time. And I think it's because with Roger Waters, he was really trying to maintain that, not necessarily that image, but that idea or that memory of Syd Barrett and what he thought how the band was to be. So a lot of the music that Roger Waters was writing was not only political activism in terms of how he felt, how the world was going. In terms of, like with Money was also, I think, was something. It was. I'm a loss of words because I'm so nervous. But it was also towards the music industry as well.
Exactly.
In terms of the executives and the suits, so to speak.
Yeah, it's true. I think Roger Waters, if you see him today, he is what I could conservatively call a prickly personality. And David Gilmour, I mentioned, he's just more of a laid-back, almost Zen quality to him. Mm-hmm. If you want to see one of the most, cringeworthy celebrity interviews available on YouTube, check out Jimmy Fallon interviewing Roger Waters. Holy camole. I mean, you got this kind of goofball man-child talking to this heavy, serious international pop star. It's really awful, but I encourage our listeners, just check it out, and you'll see that, you can see the way Gilmour and Waters just are at opposite ends of the spectrum. And you know what? Maybe it did work in a way, but that's a great point that was made, is that maybe the Dark Side of the Moon was the beginning of the end. And that often happens. You get this amazing jump in popularity and whatever, and the faults are exposed. And from then on, it's a little dangerous.
Well, this is it, right? So obviously with Brain Damage, obviously like Wheels has said, it touched on insanity and neurosis. And this is also the album where they used the brand new 16-track recording equipment at Abbey Road Studios. There was also the investment of an enormous amount of time by engineer Alan Parsons, which made the album set new standards for sound and fidelity. Then it came to the album Wish You Were Here, which was released in 75, and I think it's probably the most genius cover artworks, where there's a guy shaking one guy's hand who's burning on fire, which carries the abstract theme of absence of any humanity within the music industry, and most poignantly, the absence of Syd Barrett. In addition to the classic acoustic title, Wish You Were Here, the album includes the majestic, mostly instrumental 9-part Shine On You Crazy Diamond, which is a tribute to Barrett, in which the lyrics deal explicitly with the aftermath of his breakdown. The album also includes the songs Welcome to the Machine and Have a Cigar, both of which harshly criticize the music industry. It would be their first transatlantic #1 album, reaching to the top spot in both the UK and the US. So the album eventually sold over 10 million copies, and I know Ian has one. I'm sure Carlo has one, and I know Wheels definitely has one. I have one too. So Barrett briefly appeared unannounced at Abbey Road during the recording of Shine On and shocked the band by his appearance and demeanor, and it would be the last time any of them saw him. This album also marks the beginning of their growing away from each other, thanks to personal and musical differences. And Ian, you've touched on that in previous shows. So now I'm going to leave it again back to Wheels to talk about the Roger Waters-led era, 76 to 84.
I just want to add on with that. When Syd Barrett went to the recording studio, not one member recognized him until when he left. And then Roger Waters, I think it was either Roger Waters or David Gilmour, mentioned the fact like they didn't know who this guy was. And they said, well, do you not realize it was Syd Barrett? Like, he came in and he had his eyebrows shaved and all kinds of, his appearance, his overall appearance has drastically changed compared to back in 68 or 67 when he had left the band. So it's amazing. It's amazing, but also unfortunate how quickly the demeanor or the overall appearance of one person drastically changed from his mental illness.
Go ahead, Wheels, with the Roger Waters era.
So this covers more or less 76 to 1984. So with the success of their two biggest albums, we get to January 1977 with the release of Animals. And this is a really hard point in their career because their reputation comes under increasing criticism from some listeners, mostly from fans of new punk rock. They're seen as too pretentious. Their arrangements are too complex.
Famously, Johnny Rotten showed up at a concert in a Pink Floyd T-shirt. Unfortunately, he had written above the Pink Floyd logo, "I hate." So it appeared in the Sun and all these papers, "I hate Pink Floyd."
And it doesn't help that Animals is another concept album in an era where people are starting to criticize them. But I mean, it's an amazing album. Most of the songs are tied to a theme again. Everything is inspired, in this case, by George Orwell's Animal Farm. And so you're using pigs, dogs, and sheeps as metaphor for members of contemporary society. From the cover on the artwork, you've got a giant inflatable pig, which was commissioned and floated over the Battersea Power Station. So those of you who think that's a drawing, that's actually a picture that was taken. And this became one of the most enduring symbols of Pink Floyd. And inflatable pigs were a staple of Pink Floyd's live shows from then on. It also became a running gag. If you've ever seen the Simpson episode where Homer does the music festival,
the flying pig. It's still good. It's still good.
No, that's different. It's what was the big music festival in the 90s?
Lollapalooza or something?
Lollapalooza.
Yeah.
So basically, Peter Frampton bought a pig at Pink Floyd's yard sale.
Yes.
So it just goes to show that stayed in people's mind for a long time after that.
I also mentioned there is kind of an irritating pretentiousness to this. These guys, became multi-zillionaires in huge mansions and plush Rolls-Royce lifestyles. And they're kind of bit-slapping back, so to speak, the origins of this. So that's one of these rich pop star irritation things. It's just, it kind of grates on you after a while.
So, sort of ironic, eh? They're attacking the industry and the poshness of the industry, but yet they're living lavishly because of the industry itself.
I know.
I
There's
mean,
something about it. It's just, it's like when John Lennon released Imagine, somebody pointedly said, imagine John Lennon penniless. No, you can't. I mean, he's a gazillion. So you can see, imagine there's no possession. Yeah, well, hard to imagine you without, I don't know, at least taxi fare. Come on.
Yeah.
It's also an era where they're starting to do the really big shows that Carlo talked about. I mean, they had done a lot of amazing shows prior to this, but this is where it starts blowing up into like amazing machines. If you saw the tour that they did in '77, it was an amazing tour de force because basically the first half of the show, they played every track of Animal, and the second half of the show was basically Wish You Were Here as a complete set. They called the show Pink Floyd in the Flesh, and it was the last time Pink Floyd performed a major tour with Roger Waters. The tour featured the famous inflatable puppets, which notably had a 40-foot pig balloon and a nuclear family with a mother, father, and 2.5 children. Later, the band added a Cadillac, a television, and a fridge. It was also the show where they introduced pyrotechnic waterfalls. They featured one of the biggest and most elaborate stages to date. In Chicago, the band played to an estimated audience of 95,000. It set an attendance record in Cleveland of over 80,000 people. They helped set another attendance record on the final night of the tour in Montreal, where a festival that also featured Emerson, Lake and Palmer drew another 80,000 strong audience. And that was the night Roger Waters spat in the face of a disruptive fan, and that is where The Wall
was created.
born.
Yeah, that's I was about to jump in on that. Like, is that the famous concert where Roger Waters did spit in a crowd in Montreal? I wasn't sure if that was actual fact or rumor.
No, it's a fact.
And then from off of that, he ended up creating the concept of the Wall album, where he wanted to create a wall separating from himself from the rest of from everyone else. That's
exactly.
That was my understanding, anyways.
Oh, exactly,
Yeah,
and it's
right.
both metaphoric and an actual literal wall that he wanted.
Which was the most expensive set for Pink Floyd to create.
Exactly, yeah. And this is the album where the staples of the concerts that would follow came from. So Comfortably Numb, Run Like Hell. It was a return of a more classic rock sound for the band. And The Wall spent an astonishing 15 weeks atop the U.S. charts during 1980. It sold well over 20 million copies worldwide and is often regarded as the best-selling double album ever. It's been certified 23 times platinum by the RIAA for sales of 11.5 million copies in the U.S. alone. And the huge commercial success of The Wall made Pink Floyd the only artist since the Beatles to have the best-selling albums of 2 years in less than a decade. So they had the best-selling albums of 73 and 1980. The show in which the bands were slowly obscured by a giant wall of cardboard bricks was the most ambitious the rock world has ever seen at that point, and was also turned into an Alan Parker film that starred Bob Geldof, who would return to the Floyd story 25 years later. The album sold 20 million. The album of the movie sold 20 million copies, and spanned the band's only #1 single, the anti-authoritarian Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, which I think is the, correct me if I'm wrong, Doctor, that's the one where they need a chorus every time, isn't it?
Yeah, with the kids' chorus.
We don't need no education.
Which is a great,
yeah. That Part 2 is better than Part 1, that's for sure.
It was everywhere at that time.
It's still amazing that they've only had that one #1 song, or compared to what had happened previous. All those other albums, like even Dark Side of the Moon and Animals and Wish You Were Here, that they didn't really climb to that #1 spot, which is, and then of course, I mean, yeah, they finally got their #1 single, and then they fell apart.
Right, exactly.
Well, to that point, they didn't really produce Billboard type singles. They had like these mega songs that you can't play, but by the time that Part 2 came along, I think I might be wrong. I think there were 2 mixes on that, and one was more for the AM chart, so to speak. By that I mean under 5 minutes, and so you could get a hit off of it. You can't get a hit off of some of the stuff on Dark Side of the Moon. It's just too damn long.
And as Carlo and the Doc told us, it's basically a time where everything gets really dark for Pink Floyd. So they go back to studio and they produce the final cut, which was released in 1983, and it's really a dark album. This album basically, they go back a little on previous themes, including Waters' anger at Britain's participation in the Falkland Wars. The song is the Fletcher Memorial Home, and his cynicism towards and fear of nuclear war. So that's, if you want to listen to the album, it's Two Suns in the Sunset. And although it's technically released as a Pink Floyd album, the interior sleeve, if you actually read it, has a little text where you can read "A Requiem for the Post-War Dream" by Roger Waters, performed by Pink Floyd. So you can imagine this is...
There's your arguing.
You want to really smack him.
Yeah.
He's just so incredibly self-involved.
And this is like the point where Waters and Gilmour are arguing not only in studio but on stage. Apparently it gets so bad that they were never seen in a recording studio at the same time. Gilmour even had his name removed from the production credits in protest over some of Waters'
That's a famous
decision.
story, actually.
Yeah.
And there was no tour, which at that point was just mind-boggling because Floyd were known for their tours.
And that's interesting because now, as we continue progressing through this Pink Floyd chronological order, we're going now to the David Gilmour era from 87 to 95. And after 3 years during which all 4 band members had pursued solo projects, Waters announced he was leaving the Floyd and disbanding them. Wright had left the legal entity some time before, transferring to the payroll for the Wall tour and playing no part in the final cut. But Gilmour and Mason decided to continue Pink Floyd without its erstwhile leader. A turbulent period followed, but agreement was eventually reached. Waters would continue to perform the songs on which he worked while he was with the band, as well as new solo material. Gilmour, now first among equals, and Mason would continue to record and perform with Wright as Pink Floyd. Gilmour and Mason returned to the studio in 1986 for the recording sessions of a Momentary Lapse of Reason album. Many critics say that a Momentary Lapse of Reason should really be regarded as a Gilmour solo effort, in the way that the final cut can be seen as a Waters solo album. Having usually worked in the tandem with Waters in drafting lyrics, Gilmour received further criticism for bringing writers from outside the band to assist him. The subsequent World Tour, which also spawned the live Delicate Sound of Thunder, was the band's longest and most successful ever. For over 4 years, 5.5 million people saw 200 shows, including one on a floating stage in Venice, which again earned them a venue ban, while Thunder became the first rock album to be played in a space by the Soviet-French Soyuz 7 mission. Soyuz. The band's next recording would also be their last original. The 1994 release, The Division Bell, was much more of a group effort than a Momentary Lapse of Reason had been. With Wright now reinstated as a full and contributing band member, the album was generally received more favorable by critics and fans alike than Lapse had been. Sounding more like the timeless Pink Floyd of old, saxophonist Dick Parry, a contributor to the mid-70s Floyd albums, also returned to the fold. The Division Bell Tour became the highest grossing tour in rock history to that date, with the band playing the entirety of Dark Side of the Moon in some shows, the first time they had done so since 1975. Concert featured a very large stage, a large round screen, incredible special effects, and quadraphonic sound and powerful lasers. All in all, the tour required 700 tons of steel carried by 53 articulated trucks and an initial investment of $4 million in U.S. funds. It paid off. The tour was the first to gross over $100 million U.S. with only 59 concerts, and is still one of the top grossing tours in the country. Worldwide, it played to 5.5 million people and grossed over 250 million. Well, that would piss off Roger Waters, wouldn't it? More than 10 years later.
To a point, he brought him to court.
And despite the ticket price inflation, the Rolling Stones remain the only act which managed to outgross Pink Floyd in the worldwide terms. Since then, Floyd has recorded no new material in the studio. Pink Floyd has not released any new studio material or toured since '94's The Division Bell, nor is there any sign of a forthcoming. However, the band released a live album entitled Pulse in 1995. Pulse hit number 1 in the US and featured songs recorded during one of the record-breaking 14 presentation at Earl's Court in London, which ended the Division Bell tour. Thank God. And it includes an entire performance of Dark Side of the Moon, as well other favorites from albums like The Wall and Wish You Were Here. In 1996, the band performed Wish You Were Here with Billy Corgan at their Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction. On November 16, 2005, Pink Floyd were inducted into the UK Music Hall of Fame by Pete Townsend. Gilmour and Mason attended in person, explaining that Wright was in the hospital following eye surgery, and Waters appeared on a video screen from Rome. It was stated that the chance of a reunion album is practically nil, and that any future concerts would be in the same vein as Live 8. They have also lost a few men along the way. In 2003, the band's most successful manager, Steve O'Rourke, died from a stroke. In 2006, Syd Barrett died from pancreatic cancer, and in 2008, Rick Wright followed him. We are thus left to wonder if Floyd still exists. Will they perform or record ever again? It now seems highly unlikely that their surviving members will ever convene under the name chosen by Syd Barrett, but who can say? Pink Floyd has always been a source of a wonder and somewhat of a mystery. So, Wheels, do we have time for a top 10 songs just to list them down?
We can, yeah.
All right, so we have here top 10 Floyd songs, and I'm just going to fire them off here in no particular, right, there's a particular order actually. So I'm going to fire them off. The first one is Astronomy Domine, and that's from the Piper at the Gates of Dawn. And then we have a Cigar from Wish You Were Here album. Ian, you like that one?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Sure. Brain Damage. Carlo, I think that's the one that you like, from the Dark Side of the Moon.
Yes.
There you go. What else we got? Echoes. Wheels, that's yours.
Yeah, from Meddle.
That's it. Money. I kind of enjoy that one. That's from the Dark Side of the Moon. Another than a Brick of Wall Part 2, like Ian said, that is the one that had the children singing in the choir. Shine On Your Crazy Diamond. Well, Wheels, I know you like that one. Why? I don't know. Time, very good one, like Carlo mentioned. There was a lot of clocks in the background. Wish You Were Here is another good song because, well, I just love the album artwork. And I feel definitely Comfortably Numb, knowing that Comfortably Numb is the number one song on that top 10 list.
And it is one of those songs you can really sing along with, too, with Wish You Were Here. It's one of those songs for me, whenever I hear it on the radio, I turn the volume up a bit and start singing along with it. It's one of those songs that's very I find it to be quite catchy, and it's quite an entertaining song. And I heard Roger Waters perform it here in Ottawa back in 2005 or 2006, whenever he came here. He had the Flying Piggy up in the upper atmosphere of the Scotiabank place, or whatever. It's Canadian Tire Center now, I guess, at the time. But it's one of those quite entertaining songs.
We're starting to date ourselves. We're going to call it the Palladium at one point.
That's it. And to top off the show, to end it off, the top Pink Floyd albums from worst to best. The vast majority of their albums and the backbone of Pink Floyd's tradition arrived courtesy of David Gilmour, Mason, Rick Wright, and Roger Waters. So number 15 out of the worst to best is Ummagumma. The number 14 is More. Number 13, surprise, surprise, A Momentary Lapse of Reason, which is now, we know, a David Gilmour solo project. Obscured by Clouds. Endless River came in at number 11, and then The Final Cut made the top 10. A Saucerful of Secrets is number 9, and look at that, Division Bell is number 8. Atom Heart Mother is number 7. Piper at the Gates of Dawn is number 6. Meddle is number 5. and Animals is number 4. Well, what could that mean? Well, the top 3 albums in Wheels, you always said it best. The Wall is number 3. Wish You Were Here is number 2. And, of course, Ian, no surprise.
Meet the Beatles. No, Dark Side of the Moon.
That's it. Everyone has that. What did they say? 45 million copies sold. You know why? Because you lent it to somebody and you forgot that you lent it to them. You had to go buy another one. That's why there was 45 million
Plus, you
sold.
could roll a good joint on it. It was a dark cover. You see the weed.
Exactly. So that wraps up, I guess, our Pink Floyd session. We'd like to thank our super fan Carlo for taking the time to join us on our little magical mystery tour.
This was awesome. Thank you for having me on. I
Oh,
really loved it.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming and providing some insight, because it's always nice to get a fan's perspective, because we could only go on one part of fact, but we also like to get the other part, which is the emotion, which is most important about music. So, without further ado, I'd like to thank our guest Carlo. Thank you, Carlo. So, I'm Ferris Kennedy.
Dr. Ian Clark.
Stephen Wheeler.
I'm Carlo.
Have a great night.